My Lords, the level of youth unemployment in England today is 16.2%, because so many youngsters are leaving school at 18 without any employability skills, and that is a disgrace for the fifth richest country in the world. It is also an indictment of the failure of the education policy of Conservative governments and Labour governments since the year 2000, because they have created 1 million people now at 16 to 24 who are unemployed, and that is an absolute shaming figure to do. The colleges that I've been trying to stimulate over the last 15 years, university technical colleges, has an unemployment rate of lower than 3%. 20% of our students become apprentices, 50% go to universities to study STEM subjects, and the rest get jobs locally because they've worked with the local employers for 4 years. That is what is needed. And I think that what is needed now is a revolution in education, and I think that revolution is going to be introduced by our new Prime Minister, Andy Burnham, when he is appointed on Monday, because he has made many speeches on the importance of technical and practical and vocational education, many speeches. No Prime Minister from Thatcher, no Prime Minister from John Major to Simon Starmer has made any speech on technical education and practical education and learning by hand. No Prime Minister has done it. Search as you will for it, you do not find them. And the point about this is that I think he will introduce significant changes. About 2 years ago, Andy Burnham made a statement in Manchester that he wanted to scrap the EBAC, that was the academic curriculum, and replace it by MBAC. And since then, my charity and my organisation of UTCs have been working with him to find a way through, and we have found a way through. And the answer is to look at the curriculum of all secondary schools, particularly church schools and bog standard comprehensives, and make sure that you can insert into that good technical education. And you can only do it by inserting a sleeve of education. A sleeve of education from 14 to 18. And that is what Andy Burnham asked us to provide him with for the last 2 years. And a school in Manchester will open next September, will open with a sleeve, and a school is going to open this September in Barrow-on-Furness, which is the headquarters of the British Aerospace, and they cannot recruit from the schools in Cumbria students that are talented, students that are committed. And so what will happen in that particular school is that 120 students are going to join in September. 90 have already selected the technical sleeve, and 30 have selected the academic sleeve. Now, I think that sort of pattern the Prime Minister is going to try to repeat substantially over the country, and that is something we should welcome. That is the only way we will get economic growth. It's the only way that we'll be able to reduce youth unemployment significantly. And so I think we're going to face a revolution, which is I very much welcome. The position in our country, at times you need to make great changes. I was lucky in the 1980s when great changes were necessary. I think Andy Burnham is going to be lucky because there are now great changes that have to be made. And it just does, I'm not just talking about young men. We now, in our colleges, we have many young women, particularly from the ethnic minorities, who desperately want to study engineering and computing and master that. And so I'm very optimistic. And I say, before I sit down, just one warming word to the minister who's going to reply. Could I say to her that I consider she is the only minister in the government, including the Commons, who really understands education deeply. She's really deep into it. And if there was any justice, she should be the new Secretary of State. But I don't think that the new Prime Minister will appoint Secretary of State from this House. But I hope we don't lose her, because she likes UTCs. She went to one only last week, one of the most difficult ones to reach up in the northwest of England next to Sellafield, and she likes them. And so I hope very much she keeps her job, because she does like UTCs.
My Lords, I too congratulate the noble Baroness Evans on calling this debate, and one can sense in the interventions from all sides of the House the deep disappointment and frustration that we now have once again, shockingly, 1 million young people NEET. And it is particularly frustrating as tackling the problem is not some deeply mysterious, intractable issue that cannot possibly be addressed. It is absolutely a solvable problem. And the noble Baroness Evans set out in her excellent speech the wider policies that are necessary in order to bring down the number of NEETs. I would like to focus, if I may, on specific policies aiming at those young people who tragically are already NEET or who may be about to become NEET. And the evidence from a range of initiatives under successive governments, including going right back into the 1980s and 90s, is it's some combination of the following. It is direct support for building up employability skills so that employers don't think it's high risk taking on someone who is NEET or about to be NEET. Plus, it's some lowering of the costs of taking them on, which can either be a general reduction or it can be specific incentives and rewards for employers taking on these people. There have been lots of initiatives over the decades. They work, but the trouble is they cost money. And they cost money partly because there's a dead weight cost. Some young people get off benefits into work anyway. The Treasury does not like these expensive schemes. So to win the argument for more of these programs, they have to be as well targeted as possible. And there is now increasing across Whitehall data from the NHS about family circumstances, from the Department for Education itself, from other government bodies, which would enable us to identify the young people at greatest risk of being NEET and for whom interventions will be most effective. But across Whitehall, what you hear, GDPR stops us sharing the data. The data is not brought together. Those 16 and 17-year-olds are tragically lost to the system. There is an initiative, the Kickstart initiative, trying to break down data barriers to pooling information across Whitehall. The Department for Education participates in this initiative, and its programme, typically, if admirably, is about early years. It is identifying children who at the age of 2.5 are at risk of turning up at school at 5 underprepared. Why doesn't the Department for Education also run a Kickstart initiative on identifying needs by pooling data from across Whitehall so that policies and programs to help young people into work are effectively targeted and more affordable? It is just possible that these programs will still have a cost, so we need to find a means of financing them. It is striking that the triple lock on pensions is now costing £12.6 billion a year extra in benefit expenditure than if the pension had simply been linked to earnings since 2012 when the triple lock was introduced. So if, as well as effective use of public spending through linking data, if further resource is needed, may I suggest that pension expenditure, which is the most rapidly rising and most expensive part of the total welfare benefit budget, should be where savings are found in order to tackle the problem on which all sides of the House are clearly committed.
My Lords, I congratulate the noble Lady Baroness Evans for her securing this debate and for her excellent opening speech. My Lords, Britain's economic problems did not begin with this government. That would be an unjust accusation. I'm afraid governments of all parties have laboured diligently over many years to produce today's situation. The fundamentals can be summarised in one simple set of figures. Since 2008, productivity growth has consistently fallen back. Before the financial crisis, the ONS tell us that multi-factor productivity grew at nearly 2% annually. It's now growing at about 0.5% or less, and actually has recently stagnated. In 2025, per capita GDP is actually lower than that of 2022. Now, no party in government over this period can really regard this record with satisfaction. All three, and that includes the Liberal Democrats, of course, to varying degrees, regulated, taxed, subsidised, drove energy costs up and industry out. And then came COVID, Ukraine and inflation. Each inflicted genuine damage, but each also provided Whitehall with that most renewable of resources, a convenient explanation to hide bad policy. Now, there's a glimmer, perhaps, of something better. Maybe artificial intelligence is finally going to raise output per worker. And indeed, the ONS's experimental measure of productivity suggests that it's actually risen by 4.2% since 2019, rather than 2.3% under the old measure. So perhaps something is going on. But at precisely this delicate moment, the government have chosen to test whether a green shoot can survive being repeatedly struck with a Treasury shovel. The tax burden is forecast to rise to 38.5% by the end of this decade, the highest since records began. The government's planning to spend nearly half all the money in the country. The reforms to education brought in by the Noble Lord Lord Gove have been reversed out, and we know from Wales and Scotland what the result of that is likely to be. And as we've been hearing, the Employment Rights Act has undone one of this country's few remaining strengths, our flexible labour market. Unemployment is its highest level for a decade. Youth unemployment is even worse. Net zero is compounding the problem. It's zeroing one industry after another, like Denby Potteries in my own home region of Derbyshire. Denby Potteries survived the Napoleonic Wars, 2 world wars, the early 80s recession and the pandemic, but they couldn't survive Ed Miliband. And of the terrors yet in prospect under Andy Burnham, we are currently left to guess, since he refuses to face any parliamentary scrutiny until September. We know, though, because he told that pillar of our constitution, Gary Lineker, a day or two ago, that he's going to, quote, ask us for a little more. Well, maybe a wealth tax, maybe a land value tax. Certainly we're going to get municipal corporatism on a grand scale. Now, my lords, I'm at a loss, really, to know what question to ask the noble lady, the Minister, today. After all, she comes to your lordship's chamber without knowing herself, I suspect, what's going to come next, to tell us anything about it, and yet she has to defend, as a programme for growth, an economic record of higher taxes, higher spending, riskier and more expensive jobs, a return to union-dominated schools, and among the most expensive energy in the OECD. My lords, we know that ministers want prosperity. Of course they do. The problem is they don't know how to get it. Maybe they've got lucky. After nearly 20 years of stagnation, maybe they just might have been handed the first genuine prospect of a positive productivity shock in a generation. But the problem is their instinct, faced with something that might at last grow of its own accord, is to reach for weed killer and try to convince us that it's really fertiliser. A persuasive effort which I suggest, my lords, is most accurately described as a different kind of fertiliser altogether.
My lords, I'm very grateful to my noble friend Baroness Evans for securing this debate, and if I may say, it's a pleasure to follow the noble Lord Fox. My lords, the government's stewardship of the economy over the past 2 years has been little short of catastrophic for our labour market. When the government took office 2 years ago, they inherited a labour market that had recovered from the pandemic, although it still bore some of its scars. And what did they do? As my noble friend Baroness Evans so powerfully explained, they immediately taxed employers for the act of hiring. Unsurprisingly, my lords, as we've heard, unemployment has risen rapidly ever since and now stands at just under 2 million, with over 1 million young people unemployed. If business had then not had enough already, the government introduced their business-busting Employment Rights Act, which their own impact assessment forecasts will cost employers at least £5 billion a year, with smaller businesses, of course, bearing much of the burden, further harming the prospects of the very people the government claimed to champion. My lords, noble lords opposite usually mischaracterised our arguments against the most damaging aspects of this Act as that we are somehow against workers' rights. This is absolutely not the case. The simple fact is that the most fundamental right is to have access to a job in the first place. The argument we advance is that extending rights to the moment a worker enters the building for the first time, removing the flexibility that suited both employer and worker, and making employment unaffordable leads inexorably to the fact that too many aspirant workers don't even get a day one, never mind the rights that attach. And what has been the government's response to the unemployment that they've created? A youth jobs guarantee, under which they now propose to pay employers to hire the young people those same employers can no longer afford to take on, because the government put up the employers' national insurance in the first place. My Lord, she genuinely couldn't make it up. My noble friend Baroness Evans rightly called this surreal. I think she was too polite. Throughout this period, we've had nothing but confirmation of what Pat McFadden himself admitted in private, that in the Labour Party, every conversation is about who we can tax in order to pay benefits to others. That is precisely what has happened, with the benefits bill rising, and disincentives to work multiplying with it. It became so serious that the Chancellor was forced to concede before the Treasury Committee in March that her jobs tax is responsible for the rise in youth unemployment, perhaps timed with an eye to saving her own job, which looks like another fail. My Lords, there was a moment of humility last week, a rare one. In the other place, the House passed a motion regretting the combination of the rise in employers' national insurance, the impact of the Employment Rights Act of 2025, and the regulations that make it harder for young people to get their first job. We now look to Mr Burnham to reverse the failed policies of the last 2 years, though nothing in his conduct so far gives us confidence that he will. Perhaps the noble Baroness, the Minister, could tell us exactly what Mr Burnham thinks of the government's employment-related policies so far. My Lords, in the last century, not a single Labour government left office with unemployment lower than when it arrived. Every other Labour government since, including the last two, has left it higher. Unless the government radically changes course under their new Prime Minister, that unbroken and unenviable record looks set to continue.
My Lords, can I congratulate my noble friend Baroness Evans on securing this debate and her excellent opener. We are at an end of term moment, not least because the PM who promised us in his manifesto economic growth has clearly failed, and somewhat extraordinary the Labour Party has not found one MP in its ranks who put himself or herself up for the job. So the mess we find ourselves in as a nation is largely due to actions and words from the current government. The noble lady, the Minister, should not underestimate the huge damage done in the early days of this government when we were misled about a £22 billion black hole. Yes, misled. Not one credible, I'm coming to this, not one credible economist supported the contention, and then not one credible economist supported that contention. I would welcome an intervention from anyone who can claim that such an economist who did support the contention. There is none. The negativity that ensued was disastrous. And I understand the tactics emulating George Osborne, perhaps, but the response to break that manifesto commitment and increase in taxes killed any chance of economic recovery and, of course, jobs growth. It wasn't just the retrospective taxation, such as on IHT on pensions, but the NI increases which sent the economy and youth unemployment into a tailspin. I put down amendments to exempt charities, care homes, even hospices, where the CEO of a hospice, no Tory supporter, told me that she would have to cut jobs as a direct result, and consequently people would die in greater pain and agony than need be the case. I'm not sure that Labour were proud of that, because it was unnecessary. Even worse, the increases in NI failed. We were told it was going to raise £25 billion a year, but the OBR figures reveal that it will be nearer £16.6 billion. And I'm happy to be accused of to be, as Baron Lister says, a siren voice, but all the Prime Minister and the Chancellor had to do was to stand up to their own colleagues and bring welfare back to a reasonable level, and this would have been avoided. They will now pay the price. Unfortunately, as a result of this, the cost of employing an 18 to 20-year-old rose by £4,095 between 2024 and 2026. As the former Labour Education Secretary Ruth Kelly put it, you cannot put up the cost of hiring young people and then wonder why few of them are being hired. And then, of course, the Employment Rights Act, mentioned earlier, dubbed the Unemployment Rights Act by many, has not just enforced employers to reconsider hiring new staff, it is actually forcing businesses to find ways to lay off staff and automate much faster than they had planned. And I have spoken to manufacturers, whose name I can reveal, who have done that. This cannot be what HM government expected to see. Unemployment for over 16s is now at 4.9%. Inactivity rates are 21%, according to the Excellent Jobs Foundation's recent report. This week alone, the Entrepreneurs Network, who run the APPG Entrepreneurs, of which I'm an officer, published their 4th survey. 79% of founders of businesses feel that the government does not understand their needs. Only 18% are optimistic about the year ahead for the economy as a whole. And most interestingly, 82% have a negative view of the level of taxation in the UK, and that is the point. It's not surprising when one reads the Policy Exchange study published this month, which points out that the tax burden is at a 70-year high, and the UK's tax take of 34.4% in 2024 has risen to 36% of GDP this year. That's way higher than any other successful members of G7. This situation will not improve by the incoming PM, a man with very little economic experience, talking about land taxes and wealth taxes increasing. So the question I have for the noble lady the Minister is, does she understand the connection between increasing the tax take, specifically on businesses, and the consequential inevitable rise on unemployment?
May I congratulate my noble friend Baroness Evans on this timely debate and her excellent remarks. It's always a pleasure as well to follow Lord Lee. My Lords, the first duty of government is the national security, including economic security of our country. And by that I mean delivering a functioning economy which creates jobs, underpins our national services and provides a safety net, welfare. It also means living within our means and protecting the right for future generations to do so. Education, employment, welfare, topics of this timely and well-chosen debate. And key to all of this is growth. Today, my Lords, I will focus my short remarks on employment and welfare. The legacy of the last 2 years of the Labour government has seen unemployment up, hirings down, a welfare bill through the roof, growth flatlining. The OBR's latest fiscal risk and sustainability report made for sombre reading, pointing out first that the fiscal problem is mainly spending-led and will likely worsen with the pressures of an ageing population, that debt is rising to unsustainable levels, the tax burden is already close to historic highs. So, on the eve of a new Prime Minister, I have a plea for Mr Burnham that we simply cannot afford more poor policy which will only make our country worse off, less able to deliver good schools, good jobs and support those who can't support themselves. So, my Lord, what is Mr Burnham's plan for growth? Well, we hear that he wants to put taxes up, has ruled out so-called crude cuts to welfare and is sceptical about what he calls tech boosterism. His growth plan for devolution, which may or may not boost growth, I do hope it does, is a longer term, not an immediate growth plan. Yet just at the moment, this is just a moment to be getting behind tech. We have the potential to play a leading role in AI to reinforce our competitive advantage for innovation in startups, quantum and cyber, and to boost productivity we so desperately need in the NHS. And let's look at tax policy. Mr Burnham is considering bringing a capital gains tax in line with income tax, which would make us the highest rate in Europe, with less money to invest in new businesses who create jobs. As the Tony Blair Institute warned just this week, taxing our way to prosperity is both bad policy and bad politics. By hiking national insurance minimum wage for the youngest and adding regulation to working rights, Labour have hammered business, not helped them, worsening job prospects, especially for the young, as many Lords have mentioned, adding to their job struggles, as even the Resolution Foundation warned. We now have over 1 million NEETs, as many have said. 1 in 5 working age adults on benefits and growing. Where is the balance here, my lords? This is a tragedy our society can ill afford. And let us remember what our commitment is, to help people who can't and support those who can back to work. And if you don't want to listen to me, listen to your own advisors. Alan Milburn, who speaks devastatingly the silence of the unheard voice of young people applying for jobs, or Lord Timms, who warns that PIPs are due to double by 2030 and must be addressed, or even Charlie Mayhew, who tries to tackle sickness at work. We need urgently to reassess and rebalance. So I would ask the Minister and to urge the new Prime Minister that he has a strategy for growth and the bravery to address some of these very difficult issues in our country, getting behind businesses and entrepreneurs, incentivising work, getting young people a foot in life, and tackling the tragic and increasingly unaffordable welfare bill.
My Lords, what an excellent debate. The House at its very best. I've actually lost count of the number of former ministers and cabinet members speaking in their areas of expertise, and I thank them all. What's striking is how much we agree on. No one here disagrees that children should be lifted out of poverty, that they should realise their potential, that they should have productive and fulfilling lives, and that we want to see our country flourish and thrive. Where we differ is about how we get there. My Lords, we're not going to agree on all of that, but there may be some things that we can learn from today. It is the case that the government inherited record employment, some of the strongest reading and numeracy results in the Western world, a narrowing disadvantage gap in our primary schools, and an economy back in growth. But it would be wrong not to acknowledge the profound and lasting effects of the pandemic on school attendance, on mental health, and on our national working culture, and the fact that the government inherited those challenges also. The question today is whether they have risen to the challenges. My Lords, I don't know if you're aware of parallel play. It's a phrase used in child psychology to describe how children up to the age of 2 play next to each other with similar toys, but do not actively interact. It's how the government's own reviewer, Alan Milburn, has described this government's lack of strategy. Perhaps that lack of strategy itself the consequence of what the Prime Minister's former Chief of Staff, Morgan McSweeney, admitted was a failure to prepare for government. But, my Lords, playing at governing has real-life consequences, and it is our young people who pay the highest price. The problems since July 2024 and the government's performance can be traced to the contradictions that lie within so much it has done. It couldn't be more vividly or sadly illustrated by the way in which it has torn down a cornerstone of its own party's legacy under Tony Blair. In 2021, England's 10-year-olds were ranked 4th in the world for reading, the best in the West. In mathematics, we had climbed from 27th to 11th. By 2018, the disadvantage gap at the end of primary school was down to 9.2 months, the narrowest ever recorded. That work began under the last Labour government, and I pay tribute to the part that the noble Baroness, the Minister opposite me, played in that herself when she was Education Minister in the Blair government. When we entered government, we built on those foundations proudly. Policy Exchange research found 83% of the highest performing schools serving disadvantaged children are academies or free schools. But inexplicably, this government's Children's Wellbeing in Schools Act will end that success by returning to the old default of central control without a shred of evidence that that will affect outcomes. This government has said it wants to eliminate the advantage gap. We all do. but then inexplicably undid the very reforms begun by their own party that had helped the most disadvantaged. And what about our young adults? We've heard so much about them today. More than 1 million young people now outside education, employment or training. The first time we have crossed that line since 2013. Alan Milburn is clear that the causes are complex. And the Noble Baroness, the Minister, has said the same in this House. I agree, but his verdict is still damning. He puts the cost at £125 billion a year and describes the young victims of this chaos as a lost generation. 84% of them want to work, yet nearly 2/3 have never held a paid job. In his words, the aspiration is there, the opportunity is not. Why not? Well, we've heard today from the benches behind me about the economic consequences of the taxation rises. What has the government done to opportunity? It's raised the cost of taxation on business and hit the cost of employing young people from 3 different directions. £25 billion of new costs through a national insurance rise. And yes, young people are exempted from national insurance, but the burden those businesses are carrying has been stated repeatedly by our public bodies to be the reason why they're not hiring young people. It's no good to say they're exempt when businesses talk about having to cut all their jobs. And a record 16% rise in the minimum wage for 18 to 20-year-olds makes them much more expensive to hire. Excessive new employment rights make taking on an untested young worker a bigger risk for many smaller firms, which they simply cannot afford. The government was warned so many times. The IFS warned the combined changes would reduce opportunities for younger workers. The Bank of England's chief economist told the Treasury Committee that it would hit age 16 to 21 hardest. The Low Pay Commission said employment would fall most among the young. The government ploughed ahead. The result has been brutal. Today, 2 years after this government was elected, youth unemployment is close to 1 in 6 at 16.2%. According to the Labour Force survey, that is the highest in over a decade. And the number of NEETs is tracking upwards. And that's according to Alan Milburn, who says it will reach 1.25 million, another 250,000 within 5 years. The ONS has confirmed firms are not hiring because of the cost of employment. And so again, we see contradictions at the heart of government, with one department spending public money on youth scheme we have heard about today to coax young people into work, while the others have taken the jobs away. As one of the great heroes of the left, Aneurin Bevan, said, "We know what happens to people when they're unemployed. Their skill goes, their hope goes, their self-respect goes. They are an army of the defeated. An army, my lords, that is now 4 million people of working age. And more than half, since the 1 in 10 are on health-related benefits, and more than half of the rise since the pandemic relates to mental health. Here again, the government's left and right hands do not meet. Its health secretary says this country overdiagnoses mental health and writes too many people off, so much so that he has commissioned Professor Fonagy to examine the striking rise of diagnosis of anxiety, depression, ADHD and autism. But the welfare system continues to pay out in ever greater numbers on precisely those diagnoses. The state has become quicker to pay for a condition than to treat it. And the science reinforces what Bevan knew. The research warns about excessive labelling. One of the world's most cited neuroscientists, Lisa Feldman Barrett, shows that the brain learns to expect what we teach it to expect. Label difficult behaviours as fixed incapacity, and people believe they are incapable. So one part of government says we label too much, and another is funding the labelling and calling it support. And Milburn is describing a welfare gateway that has become a one-way valve, cohorts staying longer and longer, funding the problem but not solving it. And so the vicious circle remains closed. The very taxes raised to fund the welfare bill have destroyed the entry-level jobs that, on the government's own evidence, would have kept young people busy and well. The revenue measure has defeated the fiscal aim. Funding more diagnosis defeats the health aim. Each department, as Milburn says, plays alone next to the others, and real young people fall through the gaps between them. None of this evidence is mine. It's theirs, their data, their reviewer, their health secretary, their own party's research. They were warned, they were asked to stop, but they have carried on, and a generation of young people, our nation's taxpayers, and the British economy are paying the price.